Someone asked me what my sign was. I said Scorpio, but then they were like, oh, don't you realize you have a moon sign and a Mars sign and all these things? And then I started to look it up and I was like, I do like performing. That's kind of Leo. I am pretty serious about business. That's Capricorn. And I'm very interested in the subconscious, which is Scorpio. So it kind of like already started to click. And I was like, maybe there's something here. Well, I think astrology is the correspondence between planetary positions and historical, global, and individual events. So what I always say astrology represents is this cycle of self-development, actualization, and release.
Guys, welcome back to another episode of Hushed. I'm not in the studio today. I'm actually doing it over Zoom, well, if you want to call this Zoom. But today I've got Evan joined with me. Say hello, Evan.
Hey, how's it going, Shannon?
I'm good, Bob. How are you?
Doing well. Yeah, it's somehow really cold in Los Angeles today, but that's why I got a jacket on.
I'm in Scotland, so do not even talk to me about the cold. It's freezing here. It's so cold. But give everyone a little intro to who you are.
Yeah, so I am a musician turned data analyst turned astrologer. I am an astrologer on TikTok, Instagram, all the social channels. And I do it full time. I do readings for people. I educate people on astrology. And I'm approaching it from sort of a unique angle. So just building the dream right now.
Yeah, just tell me a little bit more about how you got into astrology.
Yeah, so my journey was definitely unexpected, and I would say in the end, it was just a complete course change in my life. So I was living in New York, in Manhattan, doing digital strategy consulting for people like Scott Galloway, other entrepreneurs, and just kind of worked my way up the corporate ladder. And I had a very quote unquote normal corporate life, walking Broadway, Fifth Avenue, wearing a sport coat every day, whatever.
Standard 9 to 5 is what they would say it, basically.
Yeah, standard 9 to 5. And I was pretty happy with where I was in life, just generally. But I knew that there was something missing. And I'm also a musician, so I was like definitely trying to moonlight as that. Yeah, and I've been a performing artist for, 20 years at this point. And both my parents are rock musicians. So it's kind of like in my... Yeah, so it's kind of in my blood, but I knew that there had to be something more creative that I could do besides corporate. I didn't know what that was yet, if it wasn't music per se. And so anyways, I used to go dancing at this nightclub in New York called Pyramid Club. And
what kind of music does it do? Just out of interest.
So I should have prefaced all this by saying I'm a Scorpio, and so I feel like that answers the question. But basically, this nightclub did like 80s gothic music and new wave. So we're talking like The Cure.
You like what you like, babe.
Yeah. All this kind of, it was a very, hypnotic club. Like I would just go in there and I would just dance until 4 a.m. That's when most clubs in New York close.
And I went there all the time. All the vibes.
Yeah, exactly. I think I was like probably undergoing some type of ritual without realizing it.
Hopefully not satanic though.
No, yeah, definitely not. Not intentionally, at least. But I eventually, one night I got a concussion through like a freak accident. Like I basically just like knocked the back of my head on my friend's like eyebrow or something, some crazy stuff like that. Anyways, so it was actually like bad enough where I was kind of like, wow, like this wasn't a perfect situation. But anyways, the next morning I woke up and like ever since then, I have noticed synchronicities and patterns with numbers. And then eventually I was able to not like speak English to a tree, but I was able to communicate with a tree on the East River. And it just felt in Manhattan. And it just kind of felt like it was trying to pull me into a different timeline. So I just kind of decided to like follow this path, and just trying to explore it. And eventually I moved to Los Angeles maybe 6 months later, and this was like mid 2020. So I moved to LA. I had some friends here who were already into spirituality, and they were saying, you should go watch, this show or that show or follow this person. And through all that, I decided to like explore astrology. And so I bought my first astrology book in December 2020, January 2021. And one book just to check it out, and it sort of resonated. So I bought another book, and eventually I think I read about 15 books in 4 months. So it was just very quick. God. Just literally downloaded all of the information. Yeah, I was like a sponge, and at that point Jupiter was in Aquarius at that time, and I felt like that was a really good time for just downloading stuff very quickly. And anyways, so I tried a reading on somebody who I didn't really know that well, if at all. I think I talked to them online twice, but I did their chart reading, and I said, I think your dad got in a drunk driving accident when you were 13. And she said, yeah, that happened. So I was able to figure that out just looking at the chart and the numerology and all these things. And all of a sudden it was just like, there's clearly a gift here that I can tap into. Like I should just I was just like, Evan, to myself, I was like, Evan, you should really pursue that.
Yeah, see when you were on about like the connections with the trees and stuff. Now that does not sound crazy to me, because a lot of the people that listen to the podcast know that I'm big on plant medicines, all of that good stuff. So I've had plenty of great experiences with trees, trust me. But can you elaborate on it a little bit more? Like, what was it a feeling? Was it, if you can put it into words and describe it or try and fathom what it was like?
Yeah, I think it was a feeling, it was intuition. It was also kind of like a deja vu, where I felt like, maybe I'd gone on this path before, in a different lifetime. So this was like one of the first times in my life that I thought beyond my own timeline of like, this is, one life, it's a linear timeline. And all of a sudden I kind of just jumped out of it. And so and ever since then, I do feel like I've built a connection with trees. So being able to, actually touch the tree and just kind of stand and sit with that energy of that tree for a while. It's like nature. These are things that these are things that we all have access to that I think we just have lost touch with because of our society 100%. That we live in, right? Like we're constantly trying to like do more things and be productive. But, even since all, this astrology journey began, I've started to tap into my meditation techniques and like, and when I meditate, I'm in a forest, like in my mind, and I start to activate all these parts of my mind and even my body that were shut off, that were kind of dormant, because I think about it, I'm like, yeah, go ahead.
No, finish, babe, don't worry, babe.
Oh yeah, I was just thinking like, when I meditate, I imagine I'm like in a prehistoric society where there is nothing around me. It's like, I'm just in a forest, there's nobody around. And I thought about it, I was like, to the ancients, like they had probably better instincts than us and a better connection with nature, because 100%. That was like, they had to watch out for wildlife or whatever. And so it's like, you're literally able to, I think that those instincts have been closed off to most people. And that because of that, that's why a lot of people don't buy into spirituality, because to me, spirituality is more about being able to go inside and reflect and even just like innately know your entire, your body, your entire mind, and like how it actually works.
Yeah, actually get into grips. Yeah, getting to actually grips with your emotions, tapping into your own feelings, being able to reflect. Like, I think what's really sad about our kind of society, and like as more people come into the world, we are so out of touch with nature. And I don't even think people clock onto it. We're just so glued to our phones, glued to our laptops. We go to work, we come home, we've got all these fast food chains around us. And I know this has got nothing to do with astrology, but I get what you mean, because I think people actually forget how good being in nature is. Like, we as humans are supposed to be in that normal environment. Think about how good you feel when you go to the beach, or how good you feel when you do a hike, or you just do whatever you want to do. But if it's in nature, I can guarantee that you're probably going to have a good time.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like I just know myself better, and by knowing myself more holistically, it's like I understand other people more, and and what their potentials are. And so, it actually helps me in a way when I see clients and I do sessions for people. I feel like I can kind of like instinctively recognize like where they're at right now and how they're feeling. And so that's all to say, like, I feel like my meditation has not exactly classified me yet as a psychic, but it's definitely helped me like use my instincts a little bit better to know like, oh, this person probably has some blockages in this area of their life. And in 9.9 times out of 10, it's like that, it's correct. So,
you actually end up being right.
Yeah. And people will say in sessions like, oh, you just said something that I was dreaming about last night, or you said something that I've been thinking about a lot, I've been writing about in my journal. So for me, like astrology is kind of a gateway as to a lot of other things. And this is something my
100%.
mentor told me. He was like, I don't really think that you're just here to do astrology. Like, I think it is part of your journey, but like, I think there is something more. And, I agree with that. I think that there's many modalities that bring us together and help us understand ourselves better. But like, definitely right now, like I'm locked in, dialed in on astrology. And, so basically what happened to kind of continue the track. I mean, basically what happened was I did a reading for that person, and then I tried to do a reading on another, like, friend of a friend kind of stuff, where it's like I don't really know them, so I can't like rely on information I already have.
Yeah,
and
it was not like what's the word? Time, it's not you. You're not already like what's the word that I'm looking for? Like,
you're not biased.
It's not. Yeah, that's the word. It's not already biased. Like you literally have no idea about them. You've not got any clue.
Yeah, exactly. Like I didn't want to like have any, I wanted to make sure that the skills were legit. Because, after doing a few of these, people kept saying like, oh my God, like this is really accurate. Like this actually is different than what I remember about astrology being, newspaper horoscopes and, the generic stuff. They're like, this is actually really specific. So then I was like, maybe I should start a website, just to see what happens. And so I like launched a website that summer of 2021. And obviously, I didn't have any following as an astrologer at that point because I just started. So I was just like, I wasn't getting any clients really. But I started an Instagram, and it was like okay. But then my friend was like, Evan, you should try TikTok. Like just
TikTok's
try.
Great.
Yeah, just try making these videos on TikTok. And, I have a history as a musician, as a performing artist. So I'm very comfortable like getting in front of the camera and like presenting myself. So I was like, maybe I can like somehow combine these skills. And I want to say it was like my third or fourth video that went viral. And it got like, I don't know, like 1 million views or something. And I was just like,
crazy.
I was kind of like, is this just the algorithm helping me out and trying to encourage me to make more content? Is it just a fluke? And every day, I just kept going back, making videos. It was a similar result. So I was like, okay, like I actually maybe can build something off of this, but I still had my corporate job at this time. So I was like,
so you were still doing, it was basically part-time.
Yeah, so I was able to like have a work from home version of my New York job when I moved here. So I like basically I had the time. Like I had the time. I was here all day, and I was just like, let's just see if like during lunch, when I'm just getting lunch, I'll make a video instead. And so then I started multitasking, basically having a full-time corporate job and then doing readings at night. So then I started doing readings for people like, way late at night, and I was basically just giving away my time. I would talk to people for 2 hours. And anyways, one thing led to another. And I think as my videos got bigger, I just started getting this traffic and getting these people to come book with me.
And then I guess it all kind of just falls into place.
Yeah, it just like accelerated like so quickly. And by this past summer, like around June, I was like, I'm ready to take the leap. I'm just going to do this. So I finally kind of gave my notice. And my coworkers were just like so shocked because like, I don't know, they just like would never have expected that. Because a lot of people, like once you're in corporate past a certain age,
you're just
like this. You're just there.
And I guess you can kind of say like, obviously corporate's quite a lot of logical thinking. And there's a lot of people that obviously think that astrology just is not really substantial. Like, why do you think that is? Why do you think that a lot of people don't believe in astrology?
Yeah, I think it's because it's been misrepresented by so many sort of like pop culture magazines and outlets over not just recently, but over the last like 100 years, because we've had mass media really proliferate, in the 20th century. And during that time, it was just like, how can we turn this, astrology thing into like a sun sign horoscope, even though you're actually supposed to base most of your forecasts on your rising sign. So we kind of lost a lot of the the lexicon of like, this is what this means, this is what this means. And also, Christianity played a huge role in that, in shutting out astrology, because it was viewed as sort of like, paganism, and tied to sort of like, it was just kind of like blocked out. And so, and this is thousands of years ago, basically, but really astrology had sort of like a dark age where it wasn't part of the culture, and then it started to kind of like come back in, through the Renaissance, and eventually through sort of like New Age spirituality, and then into the late 1800s, it really started to come back. But again, it kind of morphed into something of a stereotype at first. But I think we're finally getting back to a point where astrology is being more and more accepted, because we have such an influx of new, like fresh perspectives. Like I'm not the only one. Like there's a ton of other people who are waking up to astrology at this time and explaining it in a way that's very understandable. But I think that astrology is actually, this is the thing that people keep kind of getting wrong about astrology. They think that astrology is damaging because it's telling you like, this is your fate, like you have no choice or whatever. And that's actually not what astrology is. That's just, again, how it's been stereotyped. Astrology is actually a way for you to figure out the game that's being played, meaning what is your karma from your past lives. And yeah, you don't get to pick the themes at the initial part of your life, because that is fated. The chart is your chart. So your birth chart shows you, these are the themes, these are the lessons I'm trying to learn. But like through astrology, you can actually realize, oh, this is what I'm supposed to learn. How can I organize my life to overcome that? And have free will to actually take action on it. So like what I always tell clients is like, astrology is supposed to give you more control, not less control. So a lot of skeptics, when they start to like, and I love going after skeptics, by the way. I like to piss them off.
Is that your thing?
Yeah, I basically like, I kind of bait them, and I'm like, I make a video that kind of like confronts them a little bit. I basically am saying, come over here, let's have an argument.
You're basically hanging a fishing rod and just waiting for them to catch on. Yeah,
because I have so much information that I can use against them to basically, like I've heard every argument. Like I probably haven't heard every, but most of them. And 9 times out of 10, when skeptics attack astrology, they say things that prove they don't understand what it is. So they're basically
it's like they're kind of not even
allowing.
Yeah, it's like they're kind of not even allowing themselves to kind of understand or fathom it. They're just kind of shutting it down without maybe actually thinking that we're all interpreting it wrong. Like for me, I don't read my horoscope or read my chart, and I don't even know how to do it properly yet. But like I take it with a pinch of salt. I don't like absolutely live by it, but I think it obviously helps us all as humans, because there's just certain things that are just so true about it and accurate that I just can't ignore it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree. I think it's like a lot of men dislike astrology, and this is what I've realized.
Yeah, they get the ick, Evan. This is the thing. They get the ick. Yeah. So if a girl's like, "Oh, what's your sign?" and then they just bin them. They're like, "No, I've got the ick if a girl asks."
And I can't even tell you how many times like I'm sitting next to like a couple on a date, and it's like they always talk about it. I mean, so if number one, if you're a guy, like you might as well learn the lingo. But number two, like, a lot of men dislike astrology because, again, they have this misconception that astrology is all about fate and you have no control over your life. And a lot of men hate the idea that they might not have full control and full domain over their lives, at least the guys that I know. And if there's something about that they feel like they're losing their agency, where they're like, no, I am a sovereign individual. I control my environment. And it's like, that's like first of all, that's not even true, right? Because we are a function of our surroundings. But number two, again, astrology is not telling you like, again, like that you can't do anything, that you're supposed to sit on the couch. Like astrology is actually another tool in the toolkit to say, this is the direction that will be most beneficial to you. And I always tell guys, I'm like, if you want to outcompete, if you're an entrepreneur and you want to know when to invest in your business or seek investments, like, or, sign a mortgage, like you should use astrology as an extra whatever data point, and not be so closed-minded to this, right? Because it's actually,
I guess sorry, Evan, see, when you're saying like all these predictions and stuff, so see, I guess like the simple question would just kind of be like, what is astrology? Like if you were to say it in black and white, and how do you read astrology?
Yeah. Well, I think astrology is the correspondence between planetary positions and historical, global, and individual events. So it's basically speaking to this sort of like hierarchy, or I would call it like a cascading impact, where it's kind of like the positions of the planets create a certain vibration in
So
maybe
we are a vibration.
like a vibration outside of the 3D. So it's not a
Okay.
vibration that like we can measure with scientific tools that we have at the moment. It's not a vibration we can see per se. But anyways, it creates like certain energetic frequencies and vibrations that influence our psychological states, both as a collective, as humanity, which means that we shift between different historical eras based on these planetary angles and positions, but also as an individual, you go through a cyclical process based on, you know, the themes as it pertains to your birth chart. So what I always say astrology represents is this cycle of self-development, actualization, and release. So it's like it's a cycle. It's not a linear process. And so you're constantly going through, and you can see this in the birth chart, you can see this in global, you know, forecasting. It's like we're going into an era, we develop that era, it hits a peak, a pinnacle, and then we start to release that and formulate a new sort of you know, there's a new zeitgeist that comes in. So astrology basically maps that, and like, you know, you see in like philosophy and all these other schools of thought, they're basically describing this without actually using the planets. So you think about like the dialectic, the concept of a dialectic. There's like a discussion over historical eras. That's basically just talking about the cycles of the planets. And so astrology actually gives you a more precise tool to discuss all these like really heady, abstract philosophical concepts and actually make predictions. And that's something that separates it from religion. So again, a lot of skeptics say that astrology is just like religion, where it's like all about belief. But again, it's
I don't think so.
It's not, because, you know, like a religion is not going to give you a toolkit to predict exactly when something will happen. Because I feel like there's probably some people listening who are like, well, you know, are you just like making predictions and not seeing it through? Like you're just telling a client like, you know, something ridiculous like you will be a millionaire in a year and like whatever, and
very
then just like
vague and like
yeah, and it's like that's not what's happening. So whenever I see a client, I will actually tell them, I think this specific thing happened to you when you were 21, or this happened to you back in when you were 18. And, you know, again, 9 times out of 10, they tell me, yes, that did happen. And it's thematic in nature, meaning I can tell them you probably moved at whatever, 19, or at the very least, you took a huge trip overseas that changed your life, because those are kind of part of the same themes of a certain transit. And they'll say, yeah, like that is what happened. Or your parents likely, you know, had a separation, or they almost divorced at this age, and like they will tell me like, yes,
narrowing it. You're able to narrow it down, and I guess this is going back to what we were talking about earlier with why astrology's kind of got a bad name, is because there is so many of these like subscription sites, so many of these like astrologers, and they basically just claim stuff that like you could just say and guess, rather than it actually being like specific areas in your life, certain times, ages, events. Like, I get what you're saying.
And I think bad astrologers give astrology a bad name, right? There are bad astrologers, and
It's like anything, though, isn't it?
yeah, just like anything. And I've had so many clients come to me, and I always ask them, have you had a reading before? And most of the time, if they've had a reading before, they tell me it was very disappointing. As in, that person was very vague, and they didn't give me guidance that was specific to my life at all. And then after my session, I basically view my session as like I'm correcting those mistakes, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to give you like all the answers that you've been looking for. And at the end, they're like, oh, okay, so this is how astrology is supposed to work. So, and again, I'm not the only one who's doing it really well, but there are. And this is the thing, right? Like, there's not necessarily a certification process with these things. Like, there are schools.
Of course. It's not like a course that you can pass with an A and then go to get an amazing job. It's kind of all based on you as an individual, I guess. And it's almost like you're meant on that. You're put there. It's given to you as a gift, I think.
Which I think is okay. The same with psychics. They don't necessarily have a process always for developing it. And I think that's fine because like when I locked into my new path, I had to move quickly. Like there's no way, like I was moving so quickly and evolving that like I didn't want to go through a whole schooling system. Like I had to just launch this, you know, like there was a 6 months between opening my first book and launching my website, which I'm sure there's some astrologers watching this who or people in the spiritual community watching this who might think, oh, you know, 6 months might be a little quick. But the thing is, with astrology and other intuitive arts and sciences, you can unlock a lot of knowledge that was dormant. So it's not like I was learning it. It's just that I had it stored somewhere in my subconscious from past lives. So now at this
you've
point,
just almost activated it.
Yeah. Because like when I read the book, I felt like I wrote some of these books or some of these ideas. I was like, there's just no way that this is like a new concept to me because like for me, astrology, math, and music are all part of the same thing. Like, and I already had 2 of the 3. So I was already into music, I was already into math, and so astrology just clicked everything.
And when you were younger, were you interested in astrology at all? Was it just something that, or was it literally just this like event that happened and then now you're into astrology?
No, I didn't even know there was something besides a sun sign until like 2019. Like so
oh my God, we need to get into that as well.
Yeah, well, I was at work actually. I was at the office in New York, and like someone was like, because I think CoStar was getting big around that time, and someone was like, "Hey,
I've got CoStar, Evan."
Yeah, okay. I mean, hey,
Sorry.
no hate. No, I mean, it was someone asked me what my sign was. I said Scorpio. And I always thought, well, you know, I am intense. I kind of fit the description of a Scorpio, but there's no way that there's just 12 personalities. Like, that's ridiculous. So that was my understanding, again, of astrology because I didn't understand it. But then they were like, oh, don't you realize you have a moon sign and a Mars sign and all these things? Yeah, exactly. And so they'd had me look it up at work. And I was just like, that's a lot of, like, most of my chart was like Scorpio and Capricorn. I was like, this has to be a mistake. Like, aren't there more than 2 signs? And they were like, no, you're just a lot of Leo and Scorpio and Capricorn. And I was like, okay, I don't know if that makes any sense. I don't know anything about these signs. And then I started to look it up and I was like, you know, I do like performing. That's kind of Leo. I am pretty serious about business, that's Capricorn, and I'm very interested in the subconscious, which is Scorpio. So it kind of like already started to click, and I was like, maybe there's something here.
Yeah, and that's when you caught on. I mean, like, explain to people what all of the different, if you can, like in a simplified way, what your most important things are. Because like obviously you've got your sun, you've got your rising, you've got your moon. You just mentioned about Mars. I had no idea about that. I'm going to be honest. I'm not even going to act like I knew what that was.
That's okay.
But what's the most important things that you should be looking for in your your chart, I guess?
Yeah. I would say, well, we talk about the big 3 in astrology. So the sun, the moon, and the rising sign. And I think that's pretty accurate. So the reason is because the sun and the moon and the rising sign are really the placements in your birth chart that speak to your personal self, like who you are and how you express yourself, how you go through your emotions, and even just kind of your personality. And just to like back up for a second here, like basically everybody has a birth chart. So you probably heard about the birth charts. What is that exactly? It's basically a snapshot of where all the planets were at the exact time that you were born from the perspective of that town. So like if you were born, you know, in Scotland, you know, however many years ago on this day, this time, that paints a picture of the themes that you will encounter throughout your life. And it's actually also really a map of your parents at that time too. So that's what's interesting is you can actually see backwards into like your lineage through your birth chart. And I talk about that a lot in my sessions. But anyways,
wow,
this is basically showing this is the energy that you inherited from your family and karmically through past lives. And this is how you can evolve through these energies. So it doesn't mean you're stuck with your birth chart. Like eventually you can actually transcend it. But you know, generally it speaks to your predispositions, your biases, what you're really good at, what you're maybe not as good at, but you have opportunities to improve. And the sun is really your conscious self and how you express yourself to the world. Because you think about the sun, it sits at the center of the solar system. That's really like how you want to express yourself to the broader public. It's also kind of your energy and your vitality. And then the moon is very much more internal. So how do you like feel inside? If somebody if somebody says something positive or negative to you, how do you react? Like that's your moon. So if you have like a Taurus moon, you're going to be kind of chill about a lot of things. If you have a Scorpio moon like me, you're going to like maybe implode based on certain things that happen.
My boyfriend Evan is Scorpio moon.
Oh wow. Okay. So he actually could be interested. He could be interested in astrology, I think, based on.
But I feel like he's really like he's not a really great communicator. So he's Aquarius sun, he's Aries rising, and he's Scorpio moon.
Wow.
And I bring it up all the time. I'm like, yes, because you're a Scorpio moon.
Yeah, well, see, this is the thing. I think Scorpio. Yeah, that might be part of it. Scorpio moons like do not really know. They're kind of like sitting on their emotions, right? Like they're just sitting. It's like a pressure cooker, as I describe it. It's like a pressure cooker with no air hole. That's just like you're feeling a lot of emotions, but you're unwilling to let them out because it's just like
nothing,
the Scorpio
nada.
Moon, yeah. Well, because the Scorpio moon talks about the parents, the moon is the family and sometimes the mother. But usually with the Scorpio moon, like there is some type of like dynamic in the household where it's like emotions are not discussed always. And sometimes like the parents are not that nurturing actually. So the Scorpio moon and the Capricorn moon, by the way, both of those moons are a little bit tough because you're kind of suppressed or repressed. But anyways, like I could talk about that forever, but basically the moon... the moon is like your internal dialogue, your internal world and emotional landscape. And it's hard to change that. Like the moon is very instincts driven. The sun is a little bit more like, how do I want to express myself? It's more conscious, but the moon is subconscious and unconscious. And then the rising sign is actually symbolically the soul entering the body. So the rising sign is the eastern horizon at the time you were born. So exactly when you were born, what constellation was rising in the east? That points to you've entered the world as a unique individual, and this is suddenly your perspective of your environment and kind of how you begin situations. So if you're an Aries rising, you would begin situations with a certain kind of like competitive zeal, and you would be of assertive.
It's so on point. It's so funny. Like, it's so funny when you say it because I'm just like, I get a new car and it's like, oh, I need to get a better car. And I'm like, you're so competitive. Like, I love how this just went into reading my boyfriend, but I just can't wait to be like, I've cottoned on to you so much.
Yes, exactly. Now I know. Now I know how to play the game. Yeah, I'm a Cancer rising, so it's like I need to reach for those.
Same.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
So I'll give you my chart.
Yeah, give me your big three.
I am a Cancer sun, Cancer rising, and a Sagittarius moon.
Okay. Wow. The Sag moon just threw that for a loop.
Yeah, I'm always in conflict with myself. It's very strange.
Well, I think that, that would be a good way to describe. I think like Sag and Cancer are like pretty different, but it's not in a bad way. Actually, I kind of describe that combination as like, you have a strong sense of like home and wanting a home or, wanting always some kind of clear sense of that. But like the Sag moon does want to like expand beyond the boundaries and the borders of like what you would consider home. So I feel like there's a little bit of like wanderlust with that aspect and like wanting to travel, wanting to experience the world. But
I'm always traveling.
Yeah.
I'm always traveling, but I'm a homebody. My family are everything to me.
Yeah.
But I moved to London when I was really young because I wanted to excel in my career. But I always get sad that I'm away from home because I'm like, wait, why don't I just live in Scotland? And I'm like, oh, wait, actually, I love London. So that's very me, actually. But I find my chart a bit weird because when I seen the Sagittarius moon, I was like, bitch, what? I was so confused.
Yeah.
I was like,
but
what?
I think, you're like, how does this make sense? Yeah, I kind of think I think it's nice though to have a mix of different signs, even if they clash, because it's kind of like challenging you. Because I think sometimes when people have too much of one thing, they definitely they're kind of like one track. They're kind of a one track.
I mean, I'm definitely going to get a reading from you, Evan. Like, I'll get that when we're off the podcast. I'd love to, but I think I just think it's so funny hearing everyone's different like problematic signs. Because for me, I think it's always like, I really struggle with Geminis. Always.
Oh, yeah.
Always Geminis. And then I think apart from that, I'm kind of okay. Like some Pisces, I'm kind of like, you're a bit weird for me. But apart from that, every other sign, I've got a lot of Aquarius in my life. My best friend and my boyfriend were born on the same day.
Oh, wow.
Bit strange, yeah.
That is. Well, I think, you have Aquarius probably in your 8th house. So there's definitely some like deeper connections that you can have with Aquariuses that actually is hard to have with other people. So that actually kind of makes sense. But Geminis, I could see how that would be difficult.
Oh, I can't stand that. I'm sorry if you Yeah, I'm sorry if Geminis are listening to this, but I find that they blow way too hot and cold for me. Like when I meet someone, I like someone to be, what you see is what you get. Like I'm going to see you at a shop, say hi, and then if I see you at a party, you're going to give me the same energy unless you're having a bad day. But I feel like Geminis are very like, you can see them with one person, they'll be so lovely, and then you see them in another group and it's like they act like they don't even know who you are. And some Virgos are like that too. Sorry, I'm feeling.
Wow. Yeah. Well, no, it's fine. I always make videos like, about the signs. And I did a video recently about Gemini as the most frustrating zodiac sign. And I think I inspired a lot of Gemini hate from the Gemini followers. But
I've always struggled with them. I can just tell when someone's a Gemini. It's weird. Like, I feel like it really is really obvious that they've got two personalities. I know a lot of them claim that they don't, but they definitely do.
Oh yeah. No, there's a lot of people in there. Yeah, for sure. I mean, Geminis love to take the like devils. They play devil's advocate. Like I think for fun.
Oh yeah.
Like, but yeah. I mean, I think every sign has their own unique flavor, strengths and weaknesses. And I always tell people there's no such thing as a bad birth chart. There's not like a cursed chart. There are charts where it's like your past lives are a little complicated and you might have done some bad things, but it doesn't mean that you can't like use that energy differently this time. So like if you had a past life like in a mob or as a criminal, which I can kind of see in certain charts, like sometimes I'm like, yeah, I think you were probably coercing people for money. It's like in this lifetime, you could
you basically stole a lot of money, bro.
Yeah. Like and I can feel it, as a psychic, quasi-psychic, not quite yet, but I can kind of feel the chart. And I'm like, yeah, it feels like you really want to make that deal happen, like with whatever, money or whatever. And it's kind of odd, but at the same time, it's like you could be amazing investor. You could be like, you could know exactly what type of businesses need money versus not. You could kind of be on a Shark Tank kind of scenario. So I think that I always give clients guidance. Like I never do a session where I'm just like, this is you, these are your traits, good luck. Like that doesn't really
you're not trying to
sense.
Dictate who they are as a person, because I guess you're using the knowledge as power. So it's kind of like, here's your birth chart, this is what I'm getting from it. Like now take that with you and try and use it in your everyday life.
Yeah, exactly. And I think maybe because my business background, I'm just used to having to frame things as like imperatives or as like guidance and takeaways, but I always give people takeaways because it's just like you don't want to leave them in the dark. So like I might tell somebody you have problems karmically with certain relationships because you kind of have shallow standards. Like I can see that in a chart. So it's like maybe you kind of get out what you put in. It's like you're just looking for that person who like went to this college and has this job and you're not happy because that's how you're approaching it. And so I tell them like, you have to be internally kind of like invested in that person, not just how they make you look, like things like that. So, yeah.
What do you think about compatibility with the signs? Like how tangible do you think it is, if at all?
It's very tangible. When I look at, so I do relationship readings first of all, and sometimes both people will be there. And a lot of like much of what I say, they're like, yeah, that is what we're struggling with. Like we have passion here, but we also fight a lot. Like I can kind of like figure those things out. But generally, this is a little biased because I'm looking backwards at my relationships. But when I do, believe me, I've looked at every ex's charts. Like, I just have to do it because I'm always curious. Like, where did we go wrong?
I would do the same.
Yeah. And even my really successful relationships that were like many years long, but like they just didn't get to like the engagement phase. I was like, why didn't it happen? And I think about it in my head of like, well, we just had this one thing where we're like, maybe we didn't share quite the same interests, so we didn't really know how to carry a conversation for hours. And then it's like, sure enough, in the chart, our Mercury placements are just way off, which Mercury is like the mind and communication. So it's like, it adds up.
I'm going to get into all that as well with you, Evan, because I feel like I need to know what, and I feel like people need to know as well, like what the planets are, what influences they have, because obviously it's specific to certain things in your chart. And like, what's your favorite planet? Do you have a favorite?
Actually, I feel like I kind of do. I've never been asked that question somehow. That's really interesting. It's actually funny because most people ask, what's my favorite sign? And I don't really have an answer to that, although I would probably say Sag.
I don't really either.
I would say Sag, though, if I had to rank it.
Hey, well, I'm Sag Moon.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Yeah, I just think Sages are very generous and tolerant and like they're very global minded, and I think that they believe that everybody can teach them something. Like I think that there's like a open mindedness that not a lot of signs have. But anyways, as it comes to the planets, I actually really like Uranus, which is the planet of liberation, revolution, rebellion, and kind of individuation. So it's like, how do you stand out in society? Okay. So we have the planet Saturn, which basically. Well, let me just give you the story of the planets because I think that might be easiest.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so the sun and moon and rising I just described earlier as kind of like being the really personal placements that's really you. But then we also have personal planets, which really, the themes of the planets go from, you think about the actual order of the planets by their distance from the sun. You have Mercury all the way back to Pluto, which in astrology is still a planet. But anyway, so you start.
I would still say a planet.
I don't know what. Yeah, I wish they hadn't decommissioned it, but yeah, I mean, as you're like closer to the sun, the planet is really the more personal it is to you, basically. And as you go outward from the sun, the planet takes on more of a collective theme or whatnot. And so Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. That is basically your day-to-day communication style. And your mind, your thought process, and even kind of like how you learn and your skill sets that you're picking up. Then you go out to Venus, the next planet. Venus is like literally how you get close to people, how you build relationships, and how you seek harmony. And harmony can be through art, conversation, diplomacy, kind of things like that. Then let's skip Earth because we don't really the Earth is just like the perspective, like we're standing on Earth, so we don't really think about Earth in that way, at least in geocentric.
It's not really in the chart or that. Yeah,
it's really at the center, so it's kind of at the center. Think about the Earth as the center of the charts, but then we go to Mars, and Mars is really your adrenaline, your fight or flight, your ability to physically exert yourself, and that's also kind of your energy, similar to the sun. It's like your vitality. And it's also your competitive nature, and in a little bit of a way, kind of your ego. But then we get into Jupiter, the next planet, and that is more about how you expand your horizons. How you bring more of the outside world in. So you travel, you go to college, you learn the rules of society, and you have a sense of justice. And then we go to Saturn, which is usually where people stop. So most people stop developing at Saturn. And this is just my opinion. Some astrologers might disagree, but I think at least in this day and age, because you have to like contextualize the planets in the time frame of where we live. So in my opinion, in 2022, most people stop at Saturn because Saturn is basically, you think about Saturn having a ring around it. It's basically like these are the boundaries of this is how you need to act to fit into society. So Saturn is like assimilation. It's basically like, there are people in society, whether it's your parents or your boss or your teacher or your coach or the president or whoever. Like there's people who try to mold you in their image and say, you will do this, you can't do that. It's kind of the like do's and don'ts. Yeah, and it's like the rules of the road, basically. So in my astrology course, I talk about the personal planets are basically the car, which is you. Like that's like your engine. This is all you. Jupiter and Saturn are basically like the city in which the car drives. So this is the roads, this is where you have to get, this is where you can go, these are the boundaries. And the problem is a lot of people decide to take the programming of their higher ups, whoever they are. So again, it could just be the parents saying, you will become a doctor because we were doctors, you will live on, you'll carry on this tradition, this legacy. And a lot of people feel very self-conscious to do that. So it's like, I want to marry somebody that my friends approve of, or I want to have a job that people think it legitimizes me. even though inside I don't really want that relationship or I don't really want that job. And it sounds like so commonsensical when I say it out loud, right? But it's like a lot of people
because you're doing it for other people. Yeah, you're doing it for other people. You're not doing it for yourself.
Yeah, and so the analogy I always give is like Saturn is like you're climbing to the top of the mountain, because Saturn is a good planet for manifesting. Like that's really what you need, right, to understand the rules. But a lot of people get to the top and they don't enjoy the view because they're not on their own path. So that's the analogy. And it's like I always try to course correct clients to get them on their own path. So how do you take your own path? That's the next planet, which is Uranus. So Uranus says, like kind of to borrow from my story, everybody expects me to be maybe have a normal career, right? Like people in my family, people, my friends even, because I went through a traditional path. Like I went to Northwestern University in Chicago. Like I went through like the elite educational system, and everyone from my college does like consulting, finance, law, medicine. That's basically it. And I was like, maybe I could do something that I really want to do, like astrology, because I fell in love with that. I got really good at that. But that's kind of like heretical in a lot of ways. It's very rebellious to have an amazing LinkedIn network and then all of a sudden announce on your LinkedIn, like, I'm an astrologer now. And it's like, it gets
it's just such a 360. I know what you mean. Yeah. It's kind of like, it's basically chalk and cheese. It's so far from basically everything that you thought was comforting to you and what was normal.
Yes.
Because and I guess for your family, it's kind of like, wait, Evan's doing this now? Like how,
and my dad's a Gemini.
Oh, is he? Stop it.
He's a Gemini, Mercury, Sun, Venus, Aries, Mars. Like he's just like not really into the whole idea of like esoteric whatever. It's like very much like
have you struggled then in that aspect with a lot of your relationships now, stepping away from that job that you had and doing now what you're doing?
Yeah, I would say yes. Luckily, it coincided with me moving anyways to LA, which has conjured a lot of new friendships. But I would say I had to not necessarily leave anything behind, but I think that I naturally just kind of like uncoupled from a lot of people that like maybe don't buy into my journey or kind of wonder about it. And I actually was looking at this because I announced like my full-time thing with astrology in the summer. And I looked at how did each social platform respond to that? So like TikTok, it was like, congrats. It kind of just made sense, obviously, because that's how they know me. But then Instagram, similar thing, like very good engagement. A lot of people liked that post and they were like, congrats. But I announced it on LinkedIn and it was like, I think it got like 5,000 impressions or something, that in LinkedIn post. And I'm not even making this up. I think it got like 15 likes. Like it was so
You could just smell
abysmal.
The judgment.
Yeah, you could just smell the judgment. Because on LinkedIn, if you like something, it shows up on your activity feed. So if someone likes that their coworker became an astrologer, then all of a sudden, anyone else in their network could see that they you can see it.
So it's basically just putting you on a pedestal in front of everyone and being like, he's exposed, he's an astrologer now.
Exactly. And so that LinkedIn is Saturn. Like I view LinkedIn as like a perfect metaphor for Saturn, which is basically like everything you do, everything you say is being judged professionally, and that comes from our projections of our parents, right? So our parents tell us when we're young, you shouldn't go across the street, or you shouldn't, walk too far from home. We internalize these habits, which are usually useful for our survival, but there's other things that are not so great, which is, again, like a parent saying, I don't care if you want to be a ballet dancer, you have to be a doctor. Like that happens all the time, right?
Dictating your future for you without even taking into any consideration that you might want to be your own individual person.
Yeah, and it's like crazy, right? But like we still live in that world. We live in this world where it's constantly, and everyone says when you're 18 and you become an adult that it's over, that the programming ends. But it
gets worse sometimes. It gets for a lot of people. Like your parents become more intense. There's more pressure to do well. There's more like, it's actually pretty sad when you think about it, to be honest.
It is sad. And I watch, and I can see it in people. I can see it in their aura and their eyes, like whether or not they're really living their lives. And, I did a beeline from Minneapolis to Evanston, Illinois when I was 18. I moved to college right away. I didn't take a gap year. I just went right to college. And who was waiting for me? All kinds of professors and other students from other places who kind of implicitly expect you to maybe join the fraternity or act a certain way or pursue a certain career. And it's just like all implied pressure, right? It's not literal. Like no professor is telling me you have to do this, but it's like there's an expectation.
It's really hard to describe it when you're in that situation. But it's like, even if I can think back to when I was at school and it was like, everyone's talking about, you're in your last year at high school, you've done all of your grades, everyone's talking about uni, and the amount of people looking back that I can see that just done a certain job or profession because their best mate done it, or oh well, my best mate's doing hairdressing, I'm going to go into hairdressing, or they're going to go and do law, I'm going to go and do law. Like, a lot of people don't actually have the time, or they just don't have the life experience to actually know what they want to do yet, but they've got the outside pressure of, even if it's not your parents, it's just school, everything. It's strange. Whereas for me, I completely rebelled against all of that. I'd done really well in school, got really good grades, I'd done a little bit of law, and then I tapped out and I was like, okay, I'm going to make my own path. And I moved to London, and I'm really grateful that I've got really supportive parents, and it was pretty easy for me, but I know how easy it's not for some people.
Yeah, and I think the irony is that all of these skeptics who are telling me like astrology is just putting you in a box and telling you that your fate is sealed, it's like the irony is that they're not awake and they're probably doing a career that is totally programmed for them. So that's the irony, is like I'm over here on this other island basically saying I used astrology to get away, to untether myself. And that's why I'm on this path, because I looked at my chart and I was like, okay, like I need to think about that other planet outside past Saturn. I need to go into Uranus and channel that, which is about awakening. Like I said, liberation. And so that's why it's my favorite planet, because Uranus is really breaking through those expectations.
And like saying, what people think of you and what you should and shouldn't be doing, instead of rather just letting you live your life without any outside noise, really.
Yeah, I mean, I basically had to take a risk, to do this, in the sense of like there was going to be judgment, and it's like, Christmases are a little bit more awkward now. That I'm astrologer.
Is it that bad, Evan?
Well, it depends on which side of the family. Okay. Because it depends on if you're in. I mean, it really depends on kind of like how open-minded each individual is. But like certainly, it's like be a useful member of society kind of attitude of like go and like work for someone. But it's like a lot. Again, it's just I don't really judge them for it, because it's like they're not really interested. They've never looked into astrology. They don't know what it is. So it's like they're not equipped right now, at least, with the knowledge to really judge it. So
but they might be in a few years. Who knows?
Well, I think in a few years, everyone will have an astrologer. Maybe by a few years, I mean a couple decades. But I think eventually, like just as someone has a therapist or a doctor, that people will have an astrologer that they go for to counsel them. So like what I view myself as doing is I think any astrologer right now is on the cutting edge. Like we're actually trying to explore horizons that, I should say re-explore. But like there are, again, parts of our consciousness that have been deactivated by society, the industrial age and the information age.
Yeah, this is one thing that's really, really like kind of playing on my brain constantly is about us humans and consciousness, because it's something that like is just so under-researched. We have no idea about it, but like there's so many different ways that we can obviously gain different levels of consciousness. But I feel like people forget that we as humans, we are basically energy. And I'm a big believer in what you put out, you get back. That's like one of my main things. Like I even think about some of the food I eat sometimes, and I'm like, oh, actually, like, is this going to come back on me? Like, I deep everything. I'm such a deep thinker. But I think when it comes to astrology, people don't realize that, like, if you go back to like the ancients and lost civilizations and all of that, they all read the planets and the stars, and that's how they made their judgments on everything, because that's all they knew.
Yeah. Yeah, and
it's our history of our world.
Yeah, and it's a fixture, it's part of the furniture, as they say, and it's here to stay. So I think that if anything, we're getting the tools, with the internet now. What's amazing is that anyone can create their birth charts in an instant. So like when you go to these websites, you can just put in your birthday, birth time. In the past, pre-internet, so like pre-whatever, 95, Like you literally had to like do geometry and math and have like a pencil and a ruler and like spend a long time in an ephemeris table, all these things. You had to spend like an hour constructing your birth chart. And so only like 0.001% of the population knew how to make a birth chart pre-95. Now 100% of the population knows how to make a birth chart.
Know how to do it.
Yeah, so I think it's the internet, which by the way is a kind of a Uranus concept because we're talking about collective consciousness. So here we go. We're back to Uranus. Yeah. And, TikTok even, I compared this because I did an interview recently with the Leo King on his YouTube, and I was talking about this as the internet is kind of like the printing press, and it's basically not everything you read on the internet is accurate, obviously. There's all kinds of theories that are, just from some random person in their basement. But I think the directionally, the internet is valuable because it's like giving us access to the information that I'm not necessarily saying has been hidden from us per se. Like I don't really fall like hard on one side or the other, but I do think that it's
but without it, we're not going to access it.
Yeah, without it, we're not going to access the deeper hidden truths, whether they were actively hidden or not. We can now find it again and be like, oh, it's not just about, this is not just the one narrative concept. And, so I think astrology is just kind of like at the beginning stages of a revolution. And maybe, I think there's probably a new enlightenment coming. I really think that there's another renaissance.
I think so.
Yeah.
Do you struggle now because you can obviously read so many people's charts, you're very good at like intuition, reading people, does it struggle and like have a major impact on your relationships now?
Well, I think that I certainly look at charts sometimes I will look at charts before I meet somebody, or I have done that, and it definitely it definitely does speak to who they are and how compatible we are. But when it comes to other types of relationships, just generally, like I do find myself connecting a lot better with people who are interested in these subjects, just generally, like I can kind of tell when people are like on autopilot, and I'm not saying that in a judgmental way because I was on autopilot for most of my life. Like I started my life over at 30. Like 2 years ago. So that's when I started fresh. I was kind of reborn. But before that, for me, it was just like I was doing the same things every day to escape, which by the way, is the next planet, Neptune. Neptune, why not finish the track?
No, that's amazing. Keep going.
Yeah. So, I mean, Neptune is kind of a complicated planet, but basically it's about how we can access source, like divine source or creative muse or something, and how we kind divine of reunify with the collective. So it's like how we can feel like we're not separate, like we actually are all part of the same cosmic creation. But a lot of people, the way they experience Neptune now in this day and age is through, escapism. So whether that's through Netflix or alcohol or substances,
scrolling on your phone,
yeah. So it's it can be mind numbing actually. And if you use Neptune in the best way, then you're actually trying to transcend and elevate consciousness and use your sensitivity to other people's emotions to feel empathy for them, compassion, solidarity. But a lot of people would rather shut out those sensitivities to say, there's just a lot of emotions out there. It's overwhelming. I'd rather just watch TV. I would just watch TV and escape. So Neptune is a really tricky planet to figure out. And I think people go through phases of Neptune. So, people may go through phases where they're just partying all the time. They may go through phases where they're meditating. These are all part of the same energies because we're trying to get back to source.
What would you say to each sign? I think this will be quite cute on the podcast. What would you say to each sign for 2023?
Oh, that's a good one. I do have, first of all, I do have 2023 videos, which on my website, which are really cool. So,
don't worry, I'm going to link everything.
Oh, yeah.
For everyone.
Perfect.
And somewhere in the podcast, the description. Don't worry, in the YouTube video, I got you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, but that's all to say, like, I went through and I did the research on next year already, and each sign, I would say that some signs, first of all, have easier years coming up, I would say probably the signs in the best position next year are Taurus, Aries, and Cancer. So if
that's
you're
my household.
yeah.
My mom's Aries, my dad's Taurus, and I'm Cancer.
That
Love
should be good
that.
then. No, that should be great.
Yeah.
Because Taurus, got a lot of luck on your side next year, actually, because Jupiter is entering Taurus. So I think there's just like a lot of Tauruses have gone through some destabilization the past few years.
I was going to say this.
Going
my dad struggled a lot. And I wouldn't say for the past year, I would say for like the past 10 years, he's had bad luck after bad luck. And I mean like really big bad luck events. So that just makes me really happy when you said that. I'm like, please, next year be better for him.
Yeah. Well, I think Taurus and Aries both kind of have a little bit of like confidence coming in that they may have lacked before. The past couple years specifically, but Cancer actually has a really good chance to kind of make a splash in their careers, and also as like even like in their travels, like maybe they establish themselves like through a retreat, or maybe they start teaching, or they just like establish themselves as teachers or travel, like they're traveling, making big trips.
I booked a retreat with my best friend.
Yeah.
In January. This is weird. Yeah. I booked a retreat.
Yeah. That's so there's definitely a science to that. Like Saturn is kind of going into your 9th house, which is all about travel. So that makes sense. And then otherwise, I think Scorpios actually are going to have a pretty good year, especially through relationships. So a lot of Scorpios are going to find the right relationships. And I don't just mean that romantically. I think it could also just be like business related. So finding people who help them professionally or financially if they're an entrepreneur. Leos and Aquariuses. Aquariuses, I think, are in an interesting spot next year. Actually, Aquariuses are going to be also actually meeting a lot of people, probably romantically, but I think a lot of their exes are coming back in the summer specifically. So from like June to August.
Don't tell me that. My boyfriend's Aquarius. I'll be like,
oh, sorry. I just have to be objective. But I think Leos similarly are... I think a lot of Leos are either like ending the relationship next year if they haven't already, or getting engaged or married. A lot of Leos are feeling like they have to make a choice. They're at a crossroads in their relationships. But I think that in a lot of ways, they will do well in that area because there's some help from, I think, Venus and Mars next summer. But otherwise, what else do we even have? I'm just trying to think through the ranking because I have like a ranking in my head. Oh yeah, Capricorn. I think Capricorns are... should be pretty good next year, actually, because Saturn, basically because of Saturn's leaving Aquarius, and that like I think Capricorns really felt that pressure from Saturn. So Capricorns, I think a lot of them are going to be focusing on maybe like going towards a new educational path or whatnot, and then we have Libras, that's interesting. Libras are kind of having like I think they're having a fine year next year.
It's really strange. I don't really come into that many Libras. Like it's not really a sign that I like really connect with.
Yeah.
No, but I mean I never meet anyone and they're like, I'm a Libra.
Well, yeah, Libras.
Never.
Well, yeah, I mean Libras. I think for them, it's kind of about finishing up some creative projects actually, and then shifting into like work. So maybe they like make a song, they release it, it does well, but then they have to go and make an album because of that. So there's something, and I'm just using one analogy there, but like something like that. And then Geminis, Geminis, and I think all the mutable signs, so like Gemini, Virgo, Sag, and Pisces, all of them are going to be facing a little bit more challenges and resistance next year, but it's not always in a bad way. It's kind of like resistance at the gym. You need strength training. So they're kind of lifting weights next year. And it's basically, do you want to do that? Do you want to put the work into the family or the relationship or the job? If so, then like a lot of the mutable signs, which is what those signs are, could be manifesting. But if they're not willing to put in the work, then they might just go through a tough trial, honestly. So I think that covers Let me just look. I think that covers all the signs.
No, I think you did get them all.
Yeah. So,
Evan, if you're a Cancer, I'm going to start talking about myself for a minute because why not? If you are a Cancer, because I know you're a Cancer rising, who would you say is your most compatible?
Well, I feel like, Capricorns. Capricorns are probably
My
the most
brother's
compatible.
Capricorn.
Yeah,
we've got a very good relationship. I love my brother. Got a great relationship with him.
Capricorn. Like anytime you're a water sign, Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces, I do think you're attracted to Earth because Earth gives you a container to put your emotions into. So I find myself usually veering towards like Tauruses and Capricorns like most of the time, because they have this way of like kind of sitting with and reflect, like considering things, consequences before they act. Whereas water signs can get like really
they're very
emotional.
logical.
Yeah, they're very logical.
Yeah, like my dad and my best friend are Taurus, and I feel like they're very logical thinkers. Like I can be very hot-headed, and I can just say stuff, and I don't even like digest what I'm saying, and then they strip it back, and they're like, "Well, actually, X, Y, Z."
Yeah, they're just super organized, and and they have a sensibility about them where they're like, they're actually, it's interesting. Well, they're down to earth, so they're kind of like bringing people back to a level of realism, which like my chart doesn't have. Like I don't have like any personal planets.
You're honest.
Yeah, and so I'm just like, maybe I should try to do a world tour with my band, or maybe I should start a TikTok. And like honestly, a lot of those decisions are just pie in the sky ideas, which sometimes they work. But at the same time, like I need earthy people around me to say like, should you really go on a tour when you have 500 listeners on Spotify right now? Like, I don't know.
It's almost like keeping your feet on the ground.
Yes. Like they're definitely keeping my feet on the ground. But at the same time, they need me with all my water and fire to be like, I think you should take a chance and get out of your career. And like, and I know a lot of people who, with earth placements, who say like, I need to go and I need to go up the ladder incrementally. Like I need to seek guidance and do what my professionals or my mentors are doing and go to school and get certified and all these things. And they're very risk averse, but I'm just like, go do it. Just do it. I became an astrologer professionally. I built an entire astrology business in like 8 months, like that is fast. But like sometimes earth signs are like, what if I start doing readings too soon, and I don't have all the information yet. It's like
they think about it too much. Yeah. It's like a balance of like, go and do it, just take a leap of faith, do it, try it, and like holding yourself back almost.
Yeah, 100%. But otherwise, I think, water signs work for you. I mean, really any water and earth sign is possible. So, Virgo, Cap, Taurus, Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces. I feel like Cancer might be a little too much of the same, though, for you. Like you have Cancer.
Yeah, my ex was a Cancer, didn't really vibe.
Yeah.
But I just find it very strange that a lot of the people in my life are Aquarius. Like literally everyone that I click with is Aquarius. And I'm like, everyone always says Cancer, Aquarius, they don't work. But I'm like, for me, it seems to really work.
Well, you probably have some planets in Aquarius. Depends on when you were born, but like Saturn was in Aquarius in like the early 90s, and then Uranus and Neptune went into Aquarius in like 97.
I mean, I'm 98.
Okay, so you have a lot of Aquarius. Yeah, you have you have Uranus, and I believe Neptune, in Aquarius.
So I'm 7th of July, 1998, and I was born at 15 minutes past 4 in the morning.
Oh,
so I know my whole time.
Yeah. Wow.
But yeah, I could talk for hours about astrology. I love it.
Same.
And I just think it's one of the things that, a lot of people stick their nose up at, and they're kind of like, it's not factual and it's not this, but it's kind of like, can anyone really explain why we're all here, why we all drive cars, why we all have jobs, like why we can't breathe underwater? Like, can anyone explain these things factually? Like, just because it can't be backed up by science doesn't necessarily mean that it's not, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, that it's not right or it's not wrong, but I think a lot of people write it off when they should actually really consider astrology.
Yeah, again, it's I wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't effective and useful, because like I spent so long in corporations that I'm used to like results driven mindsets where it's like, did this work or did this not work? Was this valuable or not? And I feel like, again, there's this misconception that astrologers are scam artists or whatever, but it's like, there is no way that I could I think I've done about 500, but somewhere like I haven't counted recently, but over 500 readings this year. So I've done over 500 birth chart readings, and that's a lot. And people are paying for them, and it's like they have every incentive to tell me this wasn't valuable because they paid for it, right? And even if it's not in the call, they could email me after and say this wasn't very valuable, or they could comment on one of my TikToks or something. But it just doesn't happen, because if you truly understand the methodology, because it is a methodology, not necessarily a belief system, then it's just like a science in a lot of ways where you can apply it. And it's just like, okay, I really, really, really take the time to sit with their chart, and I can just see it. And, I have a photographic memory. So like once I see a chart once, I just kind of like, I'm like dialed in, and I just see it for what it is. And I'm just like, this is you. And they're like, basically every time they're like, you read my therapy notes basically, and you don't know me. And so I've actually had this question many times.
A client will ask me, were you in my therapy class? What's going on?
Well, I've had a couple clients say, did you like research me on social media before this or something? And which I never do, never even think to do. And I'll say, no, why? And they're like, because this is just too accurate. Like there has to be something else that you're doing. But of course, like, even if someone wanted to research their clients through social media, half the time their clients have private accounts. So you wouldn't even necessarily know what to do. So anyways, my point with that is, you're not really going to
find much from it.
Yeah, and so my point is like, the astrology is accurate to the point where it catches people off guard. And a lot of my clients have actually never had an astrology session before, and they're saying, I had never thought about it until I saw your content, because it was more straightforward and direct. And I kind of want to see if you are who you say you are, if you're actually good at this, and if it's useful. And every time they're like, what's going on here? This is crazy. This is awesome. So anyways, like but I will say, we don't really know yet why it works, right? Like no one could actually tell. And I've kind of given my theory, which I think is about vibrations and like cymatics, which is basically this idea that vibrations create the shapes in our universe. So the objects, like the planets, our bodies, are all based on like string theory and vibrations that we can't measure through scientific tools of the moment. But even if that theory was something else, the fact is that there are correspondences, right? That's what astrology is. It's like there is a correlation between where this planet is and what happens in history. And by the way, there's mundane astrology, which looks at world events and not individuals, and that pans out too.
And this is what I mean. It's like if you like I said earlier, if you actually go back to all our history, Egyptian times, Mayans, all of that, they all read the planets, the stars, everything. All of what we've learned as a human race and what we think we know about history is always changing, because they're making new discoveries constantly, and it always falls down to them back in BC, before everything, literally drawing on rocks about the planets and the stars, and it's like, how can you do that?
Yeah, it's wild.
But Evan, what would be one thing that you would say to someone that shuts you down or tells you you're talking a load of rubbish about astrology?
Well,
what would be your message?
My message. Well, I would say that astrology is not just qualitative. So it's actually something you can quantitatively predict and measure. So one thing I do when I look at the chart is I look at the numerology as well. So there's actually numbers in the chart that you can convert to like the age that someone was during that time. And you can say, again, like you moved, maybe you had a health issue. Did you take a test, a huge exam at this age and whatnot? And they'll say, yeah, that did happen. And so at that point, we're not talking about feelings or I feel like I'm more assertive or I feel like I'm more risk averse. It's like, did this happen to you? And so astrology is not just, it's not limited to personality. It's not limited to feelings, even though those are important, obviously. That's part of the journey. It is actually corresponding to things that happened. And usually what I tell skeptics is like, think about certain historical events, right? Like I said, mundane astrology. What happened on 9/11? Saturn and Pluto were opposite each other. What happened during the pandemic? Saturn and Pluto were conjunct each other. You know, what happened in the early 80s with the AIDS crisis? Saturn and Pluto were conjunct. You keep going back, and there are certain planetary cycles.
Same continuity.
Yeah. You keep going backwards, and you can see that there are correlations that are, you know, beyond what science can explain. And there are astrologers who predicted 2020. You can, you know, there's articles from astrologers who are speculating about what that next Saturn-Pluto conjunction could mean, and the astute ones knew that there would be something related to healthcare and things like that. So, you know, astrology, again, is not just a vibe. You know, even though skeptics want it to be, they want it to be that, right? And here's the other thing, just final thing I would say about it is, when did you learn about astrology as part of your, like, any part of your educational path? They will say, I never did. Even though astrology is the basis of a lot of, like, you know, Da Vinci's work, a lot of the Renaissance paintings, the way churches are constructed. It's based on, you know, the 7-day week is named after the 7 planets. There's so many things ingrained in our culture that are actually require, I think, a knowledge of astrology to have a deeper understanding of that art or of that book or that story. And yet, in at least in the US, I never once had to learn what were the symbolic themes of each planet of each zodiac sign. Yeah, and so it's almost like that's where I get into, like, not conspiracy level, but I'm always wondering, like, why would they not teach it even as a historical artifact? So even if astrology was disproven, it was no longer useful, why don't they at least talk about it as, like, this is how the ancients leveraged this in all these artifacts? It's like, it again, it makes me wonder if it's still like we're in this religious time frame where it's like, because religion demonized it and stigmatized it, that we still have decided that it can't belong in textbooks, that it is somehow like demonic or pagan, and it just doesn't have a place. It's like I want to bring that back. And so I'm just basically telling skeptics that you have a bias, and you have a bias against it because you never learned anything about it. You've only seen it as a fairy tale.
Yeah, well, it's like kind of like one of the last things really is like, it's what you're saying about it not being taught in schools. It's almost as if, I'm not big on conspiracies, I'm with you on it, but my brain does always tick and wonder, because it's like there's parts of history that they're really trying to keep at bay. And I honestly believe that a lot of astrology and going back down that path will unravel a lot of things, because there's a lot of archaeologists, there's a lot of things that they can't explain. And I don't think that they can't explain it. I think it's like they won't explain it. And there's a lot of stuff that, for a bigger agenda, I don't know, is kind of being locked at bay. And it's even like technologies and stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of things that we just don't know about. And if we were taught it in schools and education and actually learned about our history, maybe there wouldn't be so many skeptics.
Exactly. And I love that you're talking about this on your podcast, because a lot of the biggest podcasters, if I think about the top 10 podcasters in the world, I would say probably all 10 of them have never had an astrologer on their podcast. Like, definitely not the top 3. Like, there's a lot of podcasters who have huge audiences, right? And they're just like, you know, they entertain every subject. They bring in a scientist, an archaeologist, they bring in like a nutritionist, they talk about and meditation expert. But even when they go into meditation, they don't talk about the
astrology
of it. I don't know. It's like, even if they start talking about like alchemy and hermeticism, which starts to get directly into the domain of astrology, they still don't bring it up. And I'm like, wait. You're telling me about turning lead into gold. You're talking about the masculine, feminine dualities of like, the Hellenistic time period. And you're still not going to mention the spheres, the planetary spheres. You're not going to mention like any... Like, that's pretty whack, and I think that it just speaks to, again, we all have a blind spot collectively where it's like, if you want to know astrology, you got to go to that weird bookstore, in Santa Monica and just find it and find the book, and it shouldn't be that hard. You shouldn't have to seek it out.
But I think if it's meant to find you, it will. I'm a big believer in that. But I do think, like, my brain always, like I said, it always ticks because I watch all of these archaeologists, all of these things, all of these documentaries, and they always talk about like this hidden language. And I'm like, it's really not that hidden. It's basically fucking astrology, guys. It's not, it's in front of you, basically.
Exactly.
But Evan, let me know if there's anything else that you want to plug, if there's anything else you want to mention, if there's like any weird readings that you've had that like you stepped back from it and you were like, oh my God, how did I actually like work that out? Or like any emotional experiences that you've had from readings that have just made you really want to do it even more?
Yeah, I mean, one of the strangest phenomenon, which has happened many times, is this idea where I can, so I can find in certain people's charts if there was sort of traumatic experiences while they were in the womb, so at the embryonic stage. I can kind of explain like what was going on in the household before you even born, like right before you were born.
Wow.
And I can also see if like the birth was challenging, like, did they come out blue or whatever. And, what I find is when you learn about the archetypes and the themes of each planet and house of the birth chart, you can start to make connections that that very few people could make, like in a therapeutic context. So like I will tell people based on their chart, certain clients, like, okay, it looks like at this age, let's say 21, based on the numerology, you started having nightmares. You started having recurring nightmares. And I will ask them, what was your recurring nightmare? And they'll say, yeah, like at 21, my sleep started to change. And I had this dream that I was hacking through a forest with a machete. I was just running from something. And then I say, well, it looks like you also have birth trauma. And they'll say, well, I had the umbilical cord around my neck. I came out blue. And then I tell them, you realize that you're hacking that off. That's what your nightmare is about when you're going through the forest.
It's all
and you've been going through that for decades. And then it's just like you can see it in their mind. They're just like, you just like literally solved a puzzle that I've been thinking about for a long time. And then that maybe can change their sleep cycle and make it better, and they can resolve those fears, because it's basically like I'm helping people unearth and excavate fears that are so deep-seated that they're maybe even pre-birth or they're familial or in their lineage. So I can also see, again, like if the parents may have been hiding things from each other. That's one thing I always go into, is like the parents were just not emotionally open with each other, and you felt that as anxiety in yourself. And you can cut that cord, or you can drain your energy or clear your energy from that. And again, that's not something that a therapist will necessarily do. And another thing I'll say is in a chart, I'll see signs of like a quick mind. Like you have a really quick mind. Maybe concentration isn't easy for you, but you have that as a feature of your chart, and you should just figure out how to utilize that. So there are things where like they might get a advice that just like tries to say, correct this problem, or this is a problem. I'm much more intuitive and compassionate, where I say like, these are legitimate experiences or skill sets that you have that you can just harness differently. So I think that that's where I feel like my job is really fulfilling, is that I'm actually helping people.
In a sense.
Yeah. It's not about me just trying to prove something. It's not about me just trying to describe like, these are your traits, you're stuck with this. It's like, no, I found the bottleneck. Let me help you break through that.
Yes, a form of therapy, if that's what you want to call it. Yeah. And everyone has their different forms of therapy. But what's the trip that you're doing in Croatia?
Yeah, so it's really exciting. I'm hosting an astrology retreat in Croatia next early September. It's like the first week of September. And, it's going to be sightseeing, boating, going to an island, all these fun things, hiking, exploring the towns up and down the coast, the Adriatic coast. And I'm also doing custom workshops. So it's not just about having fun and sightseeing, but it's also about, learning bits and pieces of astrology that I don't talk about on my videos. So I'm designing like custom presentations for that. But we're launching it midweek, I think on Wednesday this week. So the spots open up on the, soon. But my point is,
soon.
whenever this goes up, I would say, basically just check to see if there's spots, because there might be.
I'll leave your links and stuff below as well. But
Awesome.
Thank you so much. I feel like I've learned a lot.
Oh no,
it's
thank
been amazing.
you. Thank you.
I thought I knew enough about astrology, but I feel like I actually need to pick up a book now and read more. So yeah, thank you very much. And I hope that you all enjoyed, guys. Make sure to check out Evan's TikTok. I love it. I check it on the daily. I actually do, without sounding a bit creepy. Make sure you follow his TikTok, his Instagram, everything. And if you fancy a birth chat, here's your guy.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate Shannon, and the time zone differences. We made it work.
Thank you, Evan, so much.
Thank you.
And I'll see you next week, guys. Ciao, ciao.